Facebook employees will be responsible for user data responses that could lead to death, torture, and incarceration, which seems bad, but somehow keeps getting worse. People seem to really enjoy when I made a video about a nonfiction book where the events that happened were so wild that they were even more entertaining than fiction. I am here to bring you yet another nonfiction book that I read this year that left me reeling by the constant caucasity that happened throughout the book. My flabber was gasted. And as we've established on this channel, every time I am so stunned by something in a book, I have to share it with the world. So the book in question is Careless People, which is a memoir that was written by Sarah Wynn-Williams, who is the former director of public policy at Facebook, or as we now know to be named Meta. They own WhatsApp and Instagram and have their greedy little hands and everything. And so naturally, since this is basically like an expose, she airs out a lot of the dirty secrets behind the scenes with the problematic work culture that they have, a lot of her interactions with Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. Not only does she talk about things that they have done or said that are just very reflective of how embarrassing and out of touch that wealthy people are, she also pretty much confirms from her own recounts that Facebook was engaged in a lot of harmful behavior that has impacted other countries and governments and influenced elections. We have a basic idea of how evil social media companies can be, but I think it's a whole other thing to really read in detail about how these people operate and the things that they say, and to really just have it confirmed so blatantly in your face. Then when I found out that Facebook sued the author and was able to ban her from promoting her book, that pretty much solidified me deciding to make this video. So basically the author is not allowed to promote the book. This is actually why she and her publisher hadn't planned on announcing the book until 6 weeks before the release date, because they didn't want to give Facebook enough time to be able to step in and intervene. But now that we found out that her voice is effectively being silenced, I'm like, okay, well, they didn't say I couldn't talk about the book. They didn't say you couldn't talk about the book. This is going to be a very long video because we're going to talk about so many things. It's going to involve people who are willing to go to jail for Facebook, the author having a near-death incident where she was in a coma. We're going to talk about how Sheryl Sandberg is a weirdo that gets mad if she tells you to go into bed with her as an employee and you don't join her in bed. And then lastly, of course, we're going to talk about how deeply involved Facebook was when it came to the elections for Trump and how they basically handed him the victory. I will be throwing a lot at you, so I do warn you that it will be a lot to digest. Even I couldn't help while reading this book feeling stressed out for the author as she was talking about her experiences, because no job is worth this, no matter how much you get paid. So if you also end up feeling stressed while listening to these shenanigans, a great way to take a break and relax is with the peach toy from Lovehoney, which is the sponsor of today's video. Do you ever wish that you could be discreet as billionaires out there, but not like in an evil way, just in a way where you're simply enjoying your life? This is where the peach toy comes into handy. When I say discreet, I mean that it literally just looks like a cute little peach. Not only is the packaging really cute, but when you actually take it out, it is the same size and appearance as a peach. Like many other Lovehoney toys, this one has contactless airwaves that's perfect for relaxing and unwinding and focusing on your pleasure. And in this economy and state of the world, that's really all we can depend on these days. So if you're interested in trying this out, I will have a link in my description where you can get your own peach and use my code CindyPeach20 for 20% off. And now let's dive into the tea of this book called Careless People. So first I want to give some background information about the author and how she joined Facebook. Sarah is a woman who was born and raised in New Zealand. Before she joined Facebook, she had been working as a diplomat at her country's embassy in Washington, and then before that at the United Nations. And so she's always been drawn to human rights and environmental issues. So then back in 2009, when she was using Facebook to stay connected with her friends back home as she was like moving across countries and cities, she was seeing that politicians were slowly joining Facebook, and she realized that this platform had a lot of potential to change the world and create a lot of real world impacts. One example that happens is there was an earthquake where her family was living, and Facebook was a way for her to stay plugged in to the disaster even while she was living in a different state. People can tell friends and family that they're safe, there's road closures, you can coordinate sharing supplies or post warnings about drinking water. So it really clicked in her mind seeing that there was a community whose physical infrastructure was damaged. And then they were able to find a new infrastructure online through Facebook. It was also a way for the government to get messages to citizens and for communities to come together, and it all happened organically. And so this really solidified her belief that Facebook could be a digital political tool. And so she became so eager to work at Facebook that she pitched herself to the company for months before they eventually hired her in 2011. She pitched her job as basically being like the first person to build out a public policy team and be the public policy director. Because at the time, Facebook was more so just like a normal social media company that was quickly growing, and they didn't have a role like that. And she was essentially trying to convince them, you need to have a role like this because you could do something really big, and I can help make that happen. She was able to convince them, and she was super excited to get started. But even from her very first assignment at this job, a lot of shenanigans went down. In the beginning, a lot of the stories and anecdotes that she shares is more so them being embarrassing and out of touch. In the second half, you're going to see how it has escalated into something that is very dystopian. So before we get into the serious stuff, let's just talk about the really weird behavior that these people are doing. So basically, her first assignment at this job is to be in charge of one of the first visits by a foreign head of state to Facebook at their headquarters. Coincidentally, this is the Prime Minister of New Zealand, John Key, who she's already familiar with from her previous job. So she asks if Mark Zuckerberg will host the Prime Minister because that's how it is like at the embassy. But when she suggests that, her coworkers come close to openly laughing at her because at this point, early on in the game, Mark has no interest in policy or politics. He is very much like the stereotypical nerdy engineering guy that lacks social cues and is in like his own tech bubble. So his focus is on engineering only, and his disregard for politics is a point of pride for him, where he is purposely apolitical and not interested in any of those things. This will be a big contrast later on as he enters his supervillain era, but again, we will get to that. So for this assignment, the Prime Minister visits and Sarah greets him and they're chatting and catching up. At this point, a handful of executives arrive and belatedly join the conversation. One of them gestures to the Prime Minister and says, "Seems it's true that everyone in New Zealand knows each other or their sister. Are you two related?" Sarah's like, can I introduce you to the Prime Minister of New Zealand? And the executive's like, yeah, right. And she's like, no, seriously. The Prime Minister then explains how he knows Sarah and her sister, and now the employees just stand there silent and embarrassed because why would you assume just because two people are from the same country, they must be related? And then while the Prime Minister and Sarah chat, Mark Zuckerberg emerges from one of the conference rooms and looks pissed off. Keep in mind, this is the first time Sarah meets Mark in person, and I find it funny that throughout the book, every time she describes him, she's always taking a swing at him. He's smaller, paler, and at that moment, angrier than I anticipated. With his ill-fitting t-shirt and jeans and unruly hair, he looks like the other engineers milling around the building. We are gonna see every time she has an interaction with this guy and describes him, she basically talks about him like he's some basement-dwelling loser every time he appears in the book. That at this point is like an ongoing joke to me as we go through the memoir. So anyway, Mark is so pissed off because there's a bunch of security outside the building and staff members for the prime ministers and the consulate officials and the Facebook employees from New Zealand who are also visiting. So it's like this huge circus, and he marches towards Sarah, ignoring everyone else. And Sarah says, "Hi Mark, did you want to meet the New Zealand Prime Minister?" "No, I already said I definitely didn't want to do that," he says, looking at me directly in the eyes. Well, okay. Well, since he's actually right here, John Key, Prime Minister of New Zealand, this is Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook CEO. Clearly a very awkward moment that they try to mitigate by shaking hands and taking a picture. Mark is still very irritated and uncomfortable, which he does not try to hide. Even after he does like the handshake and greets the Prime Minister, he just turns to Sarah right there and he says, "What is going on? Some of my engineers are getting pushed around." I step closer to Mark and say as quietly as possible, "Could you please perhaps have a quick word with the Prime Minister?" So then Mark makes polite conversation with the Prime Minister, but you can really feel how much of an effort it is to put up a conversation for him because he is still very visibly annoyed. The small talk ends, so now Mark can crawl back to wherever he came from. Sarah brings the Prime Minister over to meet Sheryl Sandberg, who is much better and more professional at talking to him. So then while they're chatting, she can't help but notice how at the end of the day, this whole entire arrangement for the Prime Minister to be here ended up being so trivial. The Prime Minister's office had released a statement statement suggesting that cooperation on technology and innovation issues would be discussed, but it's more of a friendly chat with IT help thrown in. Sheryl spends most of her time advising the Prime Minister on how to use his Facebook page, trying to assuage his irritation about the 5,000 person friend limit and addressing his desire to continue using his Facebook profile rather than his Facebook page to communicate. From there, I expect the conversation to turn to regulation, potential cooperation, privacy, security, or any of the other issues I had diligently included in the briefing I prepared for the meeting. Instead, talk turns to my upcoming wedding and Sheryl's plans to vacation in New Zealand at the end of the year. It becomes more surreal as the Prime Minister starts imploring us to find his friend Choppy in Queenstown, who manages a scenic helicopter business, and to tell Choppy that the Prime Minister sent us to get the real tour. Before I know it, the visit is over and I'm waving off the ginormous motorcade, wondering what just happened. I'm stunned at the complete and utter lack of substance. This is not how I picture things working. So after that happens, Sarah's like, all right, round 2, things will get better this time around. Because then the following week, she arranges the next foreign visitor, who is the German Minister of Consumer Protection. This is important because even though most countries like Facebook, Germany is an outlier. They don't fuck with Facebook and they disapprove everything Facebook stands for. And that's because they're suspicious of anyone who wants to gather personal information and trying to push a surveillance tool, which is actually quite based of them in the grand scheme of things. As soon as the German delegation is seated in the meeting room, we start formal introductions. Marnie explains her background, that she's relatively new to Facebook, having most recently worked at the White House under Larry Summers. At the end of listing her Harvard and government credentials, she concludes with, "And I'm Jewish." The room is silent. I mean, I don't bring that up because of the Holocaust. Absolute silence. As if every living thing in the meeting room has been frozen. I'm trapped in some terrible parody of diplomacy. It's just, I figured you already knew, she continues. We can discuss it if you wish. Why the fuck would you say this? What happened to hello? How are you? How was your flight? Even I, an unprofessional person who shows up to my day job with my nipple sticking out because I can't be bothered to wear a bra, would still have a little bit of decorum to know not to meet a German official at work and be like, hey, remember the Holocaust? We settle into the discussion. Very quickly, the delegation brings up content moderation. They want Facebook to be more vigilant in pulling down hate speech. Marnie explains that Facebook's built on the kinds of free speech rights embodied by the First Amendment in the United States, so we generally leave content untouched. She then segues into an example of cultural differences between the US and Germany. She says she doesn't care to sunbathe topless or to share topless images, but that Germans seem to. I don't think I'm the only one in the room struggling to avoid the mental image of Marnie topless, and the overgeneralization that all Germans enjoy sharing topless images isn't helping. The minister physically bristles. I flash Marnie a "what are you doing" look. It's downhill from there. The discussion and regulation doesn't go much better. After the delegation is escorted out of our offices, I'm despondent. This was horrible at every level. We failed when it mattered, with the country we most needed to win over. I hadn't contemplated failing at this. For the first time, I think this might not work. No one's surprised when the German government opens an investigation into Facebook a few weeks later. What the fuck is going on? This is just the early days. We haven't even gotten to the point of you guys aiding a genocide and cheating an election. My personal belief for why these weird, embarrassing interactions are happening is because these people are rich, and rich people live in a different reality from us. What Sarah comes to learn as she continues working at Facebook is that there is exorbitant wealth across the company. For example, there's one time where Sarah compliments her employee's assistant's shoes. She says, "That red sole is incredible. I've never seen that before. Where'd you get them?" And that assistant comes over to her desk and places her hands on Sarah's shoulders. "Sweetie, you'll never be able to afford a pair like these." And Sarah confirms that the assistant is right, because when she Googles the red sole shoes, she finds out that they are from Christian Louboutin. I think if you work in tech or in similar industries, it might not be a surprise to you that obscene wealth often flows through these companies. At Facebook, it is based on tenure rather than title. So the longer that you've worked at Facebook, the wealthier you are, which means that there are assistants and junior staff who are worth vastly more than their bosses based on where they were hired. So there's women wearing diamond bracelets, Louis Vuitton handbags that are thousands of dollars, and other status symbols. Another sign of the wealth at Facebook, the weird things people say. One day, Sam Lesson, a director of product, refers to himself as both price insensitive and economically insensitive. I have to ask Marnie what he means. The answer? He has so much money that he doesn't care what things cost. When Debbie refers to herself as an economic volunteer, like most of the ex-Googlers at Facebook, I have no idea what she's saying. Over coffee, she explains to me that she made so much money from the Google IPO that the salary she earns at Facebook is basically meaningless to her overall wealth. She's at Facebook waiting for Facebook's IPO. So these these people literally don't have any reason to have a job because they already have so much money that is redundant. But they're here because they just want more money on top of the money that they already have. When we eat the rich, we need to start with them. This is something that is a contrast to Sarah's experience because her salary at Facebook is a non-tech salary because they basically just match whatever she got paid at her previous job. She also talks about the work culture at Facebook where there is a hustle and grind mindset. There is this expectation of constant productivity at all times and no work-life balance, and that your life is your job. Sheryl Sandberg tells me that the punishing scale of work is by design, a choice Facebook's leaders had made, that staffers should be given too much to do because it's best if no one has spare time. That's where the trouble and territoriality start. The fewer employees, the harder they work. The answer to work is more work. To encourage this, the Facebook offices are overflowing with perks. I think this part of Silicon Valley work life is something everyone's heard about by now. It's parodied on TV shows. The offices are like a never-ending kid's birthday party. All meals are provided, endless free snacks, game arcades, bring your laundry to work and someone will do it for you. They'll pay for transport if you can't access Facebook's free transportation. I feel deeply conflicted about these perks, simultaneously eye-rolly and loving it. But the quid pro quo is clear. This stuff isn't free. As someone who has experience working at big social media companies and being in the tech industry, the advice that I try to give to people who are also in tech and need to wake the fuck up is that if you are gonna be in this kind of industry, you need to just pack your free lunch and go the fuck home. Do not bend over backwards for a company that does not give a shit whether you live or you die. But sadly for Sarah, it seems that she is willing to risk a lot for the sake of her job. One of the worst work trips that she has experienced is when Facebook wants to get new users from Myanmar and therefore decide to send Sarah over there. And this is because before they can hone in on these new users, the military junta that runs Myanmar blocks Facebook. And Facebook doesn't know why, so they tell Sarah to go over there to figure out what's going on. A coworker literally tells her, don't come back until you've sorted it out. So days later, she goes there and her hotel has no electricity, no hot water, no internet, and no cell service, which obviously makes setting up meetings impossible. For this trip, she signed up for the World Economic Forum that's having a regional meeting in Myanmar. She looks through a list of participants to find another New Zealander to try to get inside the events and try to, connect with them. And that's kind of like her way in, because once she's inside the event, she can ask people how she can set up a meeting between Facebook and the junta. She then finds out that the person leading the opposition party in recent elections is attending a luncheon. So she gets there early, looks for the seating plan, and aims to seat herself next to the leader at the table, even though she's not even on the guest list. Keep in mind, she's doing all of this while jet lagged, and I will have to give her props for this girl bossery. She gets the leader to introduce her to the Speaker of Parliament, and then they try to interact through language barriers, and then she gets invited to a meeting at the Ministry of Communications set for the next morning. Unfortunately, she has no idea how to get there because, again, her hotel has no Wi-Fi, the rotary phone doesn't let you dial out, and the hotel staff are already overwhelmed by the World Economic Forum going on, so they can't help her arrange transport. So Sarah ends up walking alone down the road in full business attire. There are no cars on the road, and she doesn't have local currency to pay some passerby for a ride. Eventually, a car comes, and she stretches out an American $20 bill and the other arm in like a thumbs up to try to hitchhike. The driver completely ignores this weird white lady just like on the street, and she's like, oh my god, if I don't show up to this meeting, Facebook's relationship with the military junta will be damaged, and I can't just go back and tell them I couldn't go to the meeting because I couldn't get a cab. Eventually, she sees another car in the distance, and she steps out onto the highway to stop the car. The driver is this middle-aged guy who has to stop, and he's like super confused about what she's trying to do. She leans in, waving her American money, but now she has to figure out how to communicate where she needs a ride because he doesn't speak English and she doesn't speak Burmese. So she tries to mimic driving while trying to like give money to him. He doesn't take it. She mimes again, and then he seems to get it this time, and he takes the money while she gets in the car. He asks her something in Burmese, and she realizes he's asking for the location, and so she tries saying Ministry of Transport and Communications. But obviously that doesn't work out because he doesn't know what the fuck she's talking about even when she repeats it 3 times. She tries writing down the name of the department on pen and paper, but then remembers that Burmese has a different script from English, and her phone doesn't have internet, so she can't translate. plate. So then she tries to drive miming, answering a telephone, and then drawing a square box in the air, which is like as close as she can get to government ministry, like they're playing a weird game of charades on like the most difficult level ever. He's obviously still confused, and she does it again, and eventually he just nods and drives her to a place, and it turns out that it's an internet cafe. She shakes her head no to tell him this isn't the right place. His face then becomes very worried because he's like, uh-oh, how the fuck do I get this weirdo white lady out of my car? Meanwhile, she's freaking the fuck out thinking, oh my god, how the hell am I gonna get to this meeting? She then remembers that the government is a junta, so she mimes marching and saluting. Miraculously, he seems to get it and drives off. The problem is, regardless of whether he understands where she wants to go, he doesn't know how to get there because he's not a taxi driver. He's just some random guy that she found. At this point, while they're doing all of this shit, the meeting has already started. They end up driving around a circular business park, and when they turn another corner, Sarah sees a building that looks like a government ministry. So she somehow makes it to the meeting. She's late, but she made it. Again, I truly have no idea how the fuck she pulled this off, because I probably would have been found dead in a ditch somewhere from my own incompetence and anxiety. So while she's waiting for the meeting, she's thinking about how she's gonna meet with the junta who have done executions, torture, human trafficking, and a long list of other things. Even arresting people for listening to a foreign radio station is like on the list of things that they've done. So she's trying to calculate a safe route out just in case things go south. But you know, it's kind of hard to plan like an escape route when she doesn't know where she is, no one else knows where she is, and also how pissed off her husband will be if she becomes a hostage in Myanmar because he didn't even want her to go on this trip in the first place. So then the junta show up and she asks them why they're blocking Facebook. And it turns out that the junta had controlled the internet until recently, and they priced it so that very few people could afford to go online. So the infrastructure that they built also let them do all the censorship and surveillance that they wanted. But now that the country is opening up, transitioning from military dictatorship to electoral democracy, and the internet is moving to everyone's phones, they're basically deciding whether to allow foreign phone companies to come in and how to handle the internet in this new semi-democratic Myanmar. And they don't want people to talk shit about the junta. So they have been blocking and unblocking Facebook on and off for quite a while. So Sarah tries to convince them that banning Facebook won't solve the fundamental problems in Myanmar, and their country has a lot to gain from freer flows of information outside state control. She asks if before they switch Facebook off again, if they could at least reach out to Facebook and explain the problem. But the thing is, they don't know how they would communicate because they don't have working government email addresses. So the meeting is kind of a bust. They agree to stay in touch, but don't specify how. Sarah then gets sent to meet other men in different locations to try to talk further about this. Overall, it is a very exhausting day. She goes back to the hotel where her husband calls her on the rotary phone and is pissed off because he hasn't heard from her at all. He thinks this whole situation is ridiculous and it's too dangerous for her to go alone by herself because, fun fact, the whole time this is happening, she is also pregnant. Yeah. She was too scared to tell her bosses that she was pregnant because she felt like she was still on trial for her job and that being pregnant would count against her. And so after the phone call with her husband, she basically feels so dejected and unhappy because she doesn't know if she's doing anything right. And so she takes a shower with no hot water and has a crying breakdown. And at this point, I'm like, girl, you in danger, okay? You got a storm coming ahead of you. Let's continue the world tour here as I recall other messy work trips she's been on. For example, when they go to South Korea, this is a trip that is not just her, but other executives, including Mark Zuckerberg. What Sarah writes though is, we're about to travel to the one country in the world where there's an open arrest warrant for Mark Zuckerberg. And Mark thinks this is the time to show us his fake gangsta handshakes. Debbie and I are trying to teach him the respectful bow one's supposed to do when meeting the leader of South Korea. Sheryl, of course, diligently absorbed all her advice on bows, greetings, gifts, and other protocol issues that arise when meeting with the head of state, but Mark treats it like a weird goofing off session. Debbie and I demonstrate where to put your hands when you bow to a president, how to arrange your face, how deep the bow goes. He crosses his arms like the Kangol hat era LL Cool J and rocks his body from side to side hip-hop style before moving to a series of fist bumps, high fives, and backward low fives. Let's not even get into how odd the moves look, coming from this slim, pale to the point of translucent man with a square haircut and very rigid posture. It is troubling, right? Because this is supposed to be a diplomatic meeting and he's not taking this shit seriously, and it's also kind of low-key racially coded that he would like make fun of their, traditional gestures over in South Korea. He and top management need to go to South Korea because they want Facebook to grow in Asia. But South Korea has an open criminal investigation into Facebook executives. They're not the only country either, but for this one specifically, the theory that Sarah shares is that it might be because South Korea had written to Facebook warning that Korean law required Facebook to submit their games on their platform to be rated by the government. Koreans say that Facebook ignored this letter, and so the police got involved, and that's why there is an arrest warrant. And to give you an idea of how you shouldn't mess with Korean police, when they started investigating Google's head of Korea had to flee the country. So a few weeks before the Korea trip, top management has a meeting because their lawyers say that the threat of jail and criminal liability is a real possibility. And in this meeting, they talk about how if they cooperate with Korea, that's going to set a precedent for other countries to issue arrest warrants on their heads to get things done. We need a body to arrest, to call their bluff, see how serious they are. It's breathtaking to me how casually leadership speaks of employees being jailed, as if it's a fact of life like taxes, though of course that's something they try to avoid. Everyone starts calling this a mitigation strategy, even though the mitigation in this case is to find a body to be arrested. I lose track of the conversation and get lost in thought about how their language removes the moral questions. A body to arrest is more like chattel you own, rather than somebody's son or daughter. Such an odd phrase to hear in corporate America. This is what we're talking about, rather than whether our actions in Korea are right or not. We need to get someone to test the appetite of the Korean authorities for arresting someone from headquarters. It can't be someone located there. They need to fly in before Mark and Sheryl do. A body. The room falls silent after he says this because nobody wants to actually volunteer themselves. They are too senior to be the body. So then everybody looks at Sarah, the least senior person in the room, and then she realizes she is the body. The wild thing about this is that she admits she would have gone and gotten arrested if it really came down to it, even though by this time she has a 7-month-old baby at home. It honestly had not occurred to me that I could say no. I have this thing, which sometimes I think is related to being an eldest daughter, that someone has to take responsibility and do the hard thing, and I guess that's going to be me. Girl, what in the Stockholm Syndrome is this? It gets to a point where we can't pretend that as a grown-ass woman that you have no agency in this. You should literally just take any job that wouldn't ask you to do jail time in a foreign country to cover for your boss's ass. Fortunately, she does not end up being the body because they ultimately realize that they need her to be at work, not at jail, in order to make Mark's Asia trip a success. And that's what gets them, not concerned for her or her family. The body that they send instead ends up being one of the only other female directors on their team who's new and looking to prove herself. Or maybe she didn't feel like she had a choice either. So she meets with the Korean authorities and fortunately doesn't get arrested, which means that the coast is clear for everyone else. So they take a private jet and they start their Asia trip. And at first, Sarah asks if she can take a normal flight instead of the private jet so that she can get travel points. When she says this, her colleague is like, "Are you an idiot? Do you know how valuable these seats are? Don't you understand that people would give anything to spend hours jetting around the world with Mark Zuckerberg?" This definitely had not factored into my thinking. There's competition about who gets to be on those flights, she continues, and it's cutthroat. What is this, a sorority? Are we pledging for Kappa Delta? Why are we trying to sit next to a pale, sweaty man and think that's such a prize? So Sarah's like, okay, forget I asked. They go on the private jet, and in there are Mark's favorite foods, which at the time are fried chicken, McDonald's, and other fast food. They go to Indonesia at this very fancy hotel. At this time, Mark is expecting his first child, and he tells them he might not be present for the birth. Since Sarah is the only person there who's birthed a baby, she's surprised and says, "What would you be doing instead?" I asked him, what in the world could possibly be more meaningful to him than the birth of his first child? He had no idea. Just something more important might come up. Fuck them kids, I guess. At some point, they play board games in the hotel like Settlers of Catan, and Sarah realizes as the game goes on that people are letting Mark win. They don't build near his settlements, they go soft when negotiating with him, they steal from everyone but him, and they never place the robber on Mark's empires. And so at some point, someone blocks another player who was close to catching Mark on victory points, and Sarah's like, "Hey, you're letting him win. You're enabling it." And then the other players are like, "What do you mean?" while giving her a look that's like, don't say this in front of Mark. But she's insistent. She's like, you know what I mean? You're doing this thing. You're doing that thing. And she turns to Mark and she's like, can't you see what they're doing? You don't want to win that way. And Mark says, I'm not winning that way. And he is genuinely looking confused and oblivious to it. And now the room is tense because she was basically making this a big deal and trying to give the game away. This anecdote on its own seems harmless, but I think it's reflective of the bigger picture that shows what a company culture is like when employees have to cater to their boss's ego and make him feel like a winner, even for something as small and dumb as a board game. It's stories like these that make me grateful for my current day job now, because when I play Mario Kart with my boss, I will not hesitate to throw a red shell at him. That's the relationship you gotta have. Also, I will be taking the free food and then going the fuck home when work hours are over. Anyway, let's talk about another country, Brazil. You know how earlier people were chill with throwing an employee in South Korea in jail, but luckily no one got arrested? Unfortunately, there is a time when someone from Facebook does get arrested. So in March of 2016, a Facebook vice president in Brazil named Diego is arrested on the way to work because WhatsApp, which is a company that Facebook owns, had refused to hand over messages in a Brazilian drug trafficking case. So the legal team went in front of a judge and argued that they should not have a Facebook employee arrested for something that WhatsApp did because they're separate companies and Diego has nothing to do with WhatsApp. But the judge says, of course Facebook and WhatsApp are the same company. And as proof, he quotes Mark's Facebook post back when Brazil had blocked WhatsApp several months ago, and Mark had posted on Facebook saying, please make your voice heard and help your government reflect the will of its people. And this had caused people to start contacting the president's office, even though she had nothing to do with the block because it was ordered by a Brazilian court. And so regardless, Mark's Facebook message implicates Diego's situation and makes it okay to arrest a Facebook employee for something WhatsApp did. At the request of the head of sales, Mark somehow manages to get a Facebook Messenger message through to Diego, who responds quickly. Thank you, Mark. It's an honor to receive this note. Everything is fine here and the legal team is doing a great job. This is our part in making the world more open and connected. Count on me. Mark loves this and emails a few of us. Diego's reaction, you can count on me, to being arrested for upholding our stance on protecting our community is deeply heartwarming. Do you have an issue with me writing this up as a short story to post on my page? I think the story says a lot about our protection of our community, our culture, and our technology. I mean, I guess it does, but not in the way he thinks. Instead of helping figure out how to do everything possible to get Diego out of jail, Mark wants to turn this into a teachable moment for users and governments around the world. He puts together a draft post. I have a heartwarming story to share. To protect our community and keep you safe, all messages you send on WhatsApp are encrypted. This means your messages are so secure that we couldn't access them even if we wanted to, and neither can governments or hackers. Of course, some governments that want access to your messages don't like this. And yesterday, Brazilian police arrested Diego, the leader of our Sao Paulo office, for protecting someone in our community and not turning over messages we couldn't access ourselves. Hard for me not to interrupt here to point out that someone in our community is an accused drug trafficker who's threatened to assassinate the judge in this case. In an email, Elliot points out to Mark that we will face criticism couching this as safety for our community. Mark went on to draft the rest of his post. As soon as I heard about Diego's arrest, I immediately sent him a message to let him and his family know we were doing everything we could to get him freed. He sent me the most amazing reply from jail. Thank you, Mark. It's an honor to receive this note. This is our part in making the world more open and connected. Count on me. Wow, so powerful. That's from someone on our team in jail for protecting our community. I know I can count on Diego, and hopefully you can also feel a little safer communicating with your friends because you know people like Diego are fighting for our community and you know you can count on them too. People try to explain to Mark that posting this is a terrible idea for a number of reasons because, for one thing, you can't frame your actions as protecting community when the government wants those WhatsApp messages to prosecute a criminal organization that murders and kidnaps people. He would also be picking a fight with the Brazilian law enforcement, which makes things even riskier for Diego and the Facebook employees that work in Brazil. And most obviously, this destroys the legal team's main defense. They're trying to get Diego out of jail by saying that WhatsApp is a different company from Facebook. So if you make this kind of statement, you're basically saying that these two companies are the same company. So there's a lot of back and forth between them because Mark really wants to post this and the legal team is like, you cannot do this. You will put people in danger. Despite saying in his note that we are doing everything to get him free, he doesn't seem to be worried about Diego in the slightest. He seems to see this first and foremost as an opportunity to write a great Facebook post, a heartwarming story. If he cared even slightly about Diego's welfare or felt responsible for him as his boss, he wouldn't be insisting on posting his little message to the world, something that could do great harm before he goes out to dinner. He'd be doing everything possible, calling Brazil's president, calling the many Brazilian legislators I introduced him to when he was lobbying for internet.org and begging them to make public statements supporting Diego's release. Doing all the things I'm doing. That kind of pressure coming from him would be more effective than coming from me. Fortunately, Diego does get released less than a day after he was arrested thanks to an appeals court. But Sarah has come away from this whole situation feeling disgusted with Mark and seeing him differently because she's like, that could have easily been me in jail. In Myanmar, in South Korea, in Thailand. And now we know that if an employee gets thrown in jail, instead of doing everything that he can as the most powerful person at the company, you're gonna obsess over some Facebook posts and then go to dinner. The gag is, several chapters later, when Mark is at a conference, Sarah brings in Diego and Mark doesn't even recognize him. I asked Diego to travel here from Brazil, partly because he's our most senior employee in the region, but mostly because he went to jail on behalf of the company and he deserves some FaceTime with the CEO. When Mark's meeting room clears, I bring Diego in. I guess I had been expecting Mark to go over and greet him. It's immediately clear that Mark has no idea who Diego is. I introduce them and Diego gets the standard Wayne smile. This poor guy had literally put his body on the line and gone to jail in Brazil for Facebook, and Mark effectively blanks him until I remind him of this fact. There's then a supremely awkward exchange where Mark thanks him in a stiff and perfunctory manner with none of the passion that was in his heartwarming Facebook post. He doesn't really want to take the time to talk to Diego, and everyone can feel it. Diego is soon shuffled to the side in favor of some new crisis. Let this be a lesson that you should never throw your body on the line for your own company because they do not give a shit at all. Now let's get into elections and other foreign policy. Facebook really wants to get into China because it's a huge country that has more than double the population of the US, but China has threatened to block Instagram, which Sarah suspects is because of Instagram's roles in protests in Hong Kong, where a lot of activists are using Instagram to organize in the Umbrella Revolution. Another reason for the censorship could be back when Hong Kong elections were happening in early 2014, Facebook deployed a megaphone icon to encourage people to vote, which upset China because they don't want Facebook to increase democratic engagement. So while Sarah is out for maternity leave, Facebook announces a new leader for the China team, and Sarah gets CC'd on an email about a letter that Facebook promised the privacy commissioner in Hong Kong. Update: Rob and I spoke with Vaughn and Zen on the China team yesterday, and they flagged a potential complication arising from the likely course of our negotiations with the Chinese government. In exchange for the ability to establish operations in China, Facebook will agree to grant the Chinese government access to Chinese users' data, including Hong Kongese users' data. New users in China will agree to a modified DUP SIR reflecting this practice, but we will have to re-TOS Hong Kongese users. What this basically means is that Facebook will grant the Chinese government access to Chinese users' data, including Hong Kong users' data, in exchange for getting into China, which would violate the consent order that Facebook agreed to with the Federal Trade Commission back in 2012, basically using Hong Kong users' data as a bargaining chip. A big player that arrives into the policy team is this guy named Joel Kaplan. He will unfortunately be a menace to Sarah and just the future of the country in general. Before he joined the team, he formerly served as an aide for President George Bush. Joel's career and passion is Republican politics, and he sees Facebook through the lens of US power. He doesn't seem to have any interest in the world outside of the US. A lot of times when the policy team talks about pressing issues in some country in Latin America or Asia, he will stop and ask Sarah to explain where the country is. This happens so frequently that a few weeks into his tenure, Sarah offered to buy him a world map, which he turned down, but then a few days later, she sees a large framed map in his office. Now, I am no geography expert because I too am a dumb American, but you would think that a person working in global policy would at least know where countries are. So after Joel takes over the job, he starts hiring a political sales team to push politicians into becoming advertisers because he wants the policy team to generate revenue with political advertising, and elections would be the biggest opportunity. For the non-Americans who are watching this video, basically how America works is that money plays a huge role in elections. It basically determines whose voice is going to be heard on every issue like guns and abortions. And Facebook can get away with this in the US because our culture has always been corrupt. But in other countries, Facebook has millions of dollars in fines in Brazil for violating bans on electoral advertising. And in Mexico, they're actually being investigated for defying restrictions on political ads. But because buying your way into politics is basically an American tradition, naturally, Joel wants to establish PACs in other countries. So PACs basically are like political action committees. They're an American thing where you pull together donors to give money to political candidates. And Sarah says this is illegal. Only US citizens can contribute to elections here. You can't have foreigners bankrolling elections. And Joel is like, well, I was actually meaning it the other way by contributing to politicians in other countries. And Sarah's like, well, that would actually be considered bribery and corruption in most countries. After this, Facebook invests heavily in campaigns and elections around the world. Sheryl directs Joel to hire teams in Asia and Latin America and Europe. They'll coach politicians on how to target specific messages to specific sorts of voters, and they'll sell them ads, make them reliant on Facebook for their power. This is what Joel's been wanting to do for a while now, and what he has been doing on a small scale. Now he gets a mandate to supercharge it. As he launches into this hiring spree, I fight it best as I can. I think this approach will only end badly. I think we'll get too close to people who lose, which could alienate whoever wins. And in other places, I think we'll get too close to objectionable people who do vile things and win office with our help. That won't be good for Facebook in a different way. Either way, we're complicit, enabling. I think it's best to stay as neutral as possible, or at the very least, let a different part of Facebook handle it, not the part of Facebook that's responsible for all policy and content decisions. But I lose every fight. Nobody's listening to me. There's a point where Mark is at a United Nations meeting. Before the speeches, you can hear on the hot mic that someone is pressing Mark to remove anti-refugee posts from Facebook in Germany. So you can hear Mark on the mic agreeing that we need to do some work on this hate speech. Then, when he gets on stage to deliver his keynote, it's a surprise to everyone, including me, when Mark announces that Facebook will be working with UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, to bring the internet to refugee camps. I've never heard anyone breathe a word about this at Facebook. Neither, apparently, has Elliot, Facebook's policy head, who sends out an email to the team asking, does anyone know where the offer of Wi-Fi to refugee camps came from? No one does. Even the head of Internet.org, Chris Daniels, was blindsided by this and writes, we would appreciate a discussion on these announcements before they are announced. Apparently, Mark made this up. Elliot meets with some of the Internet.org people to discuss how to implement what Mark promised and get Wi-Fi into refugee camps. They decide we shouldn't be giving away Wi-Fi for free, but should instead create a sustainable business model where refugees will pay. Joel hears about this and he writes to the group, apologies for the ignorant question, but do the refugees in these camps have a source of income? This is where it really hits me. There's not going to be any meaningful Wi-Fi delivered to refugee camps by Facebook, like Mark has announced at the UN. Maybe this is why we shouldn't freestyle at a meeting with the United Nations. Maybe this is why we shouldn't promise to help people most in need without a plan in place to discuss if that's even possible. You know, basic responsibility that a billionaire owner of a company that's getting involved in countries around the world would surely be cognizant of. Speaking of Internet.org, to give some background, this was a partnership between Facebook and 6 companies like Samsung, MediaTek, Opera Software, Nokia, etc., where they plan to bring affordable access to internet to less developed countries. This was a plan that was criticized a lot for violating net neutrality. 67 digital rights groups around the world have joined forces to oppose Internet.org. They summarize their objections in an open letter to Mark Zuckerberg. For starters, they point out correctly that Internet.org doesn't actually deliver the full internet. Instead, users get access to a handful of apps and websites that have been approved by Facebook and local service providers. This violates basic principles of net neutrality, the idea that everyone should have equal access to all the information and services on the internet, and the ability to create content and innovate without asking anyone for permission. Reducing the internet to a few stripped down apps also makes it that much easier for any government to control and censor the information reaching its citizens. The problems identified by the digital rights group are so cartoonishly awful that I initially assumed they have it wrong, but I discover they are right. They point out that none of the websites on Internet.org, including the stripped down version of Facebook, have the basic kinds of security and moderation we use everywhere else. So terrorism, hate speech, fraud, spam, and sexual content all go unchecked. You could be organizing a terrorist attack or inciting people to violence on Facebook. Internet.org prohibits encryption that could protect users from government surveillance or fraud or cyber attacks. There's no two-factor security protecting people's data and identities. It pushes all these problems onto the people least able to solve them. In short, Internet.org entrenches the digital divide between the haves and the have-nots by delivering a crap version of the internet to 2/3 of the world, the 2/3 least digitally literate and able to cope with it. What Mark's running in the digital rights group view is a bait and switch. He's pretending in his lofty speeches that this is all about connectivity and handing people the tools they need to better their lives, when in fact he's delivering nothing even close. The whole thing, in their view, is a power play to sign up more people to Facebook. So yes, basically we know Mark is full of shit. He is not the only one though. Among the many weirdo billionaires out there, I want to take a moment in this video to pivot a little bit to Sheryl Sandberg, because behind behind every evil billionaire group of people is always an evil white lady. For context, Sheryl is the COO of Facebook and most known for her book called Lean In, which was like the ultimate girl boss self-help book back in the 2010s. The principles in this book are basically if a woman works hard enough, she can thrive at home and at work. Women keep themselves from advancing because they don't have the self-confidence and drive that men do. She also talks about how she's tried to make Facebook a non-hierarchical organization where everyone is free to speak their thoughts and criticism, and she encourages women to start talking about sexism in the workplace. These points will become very ironic for the rest of this video. So when she first published the book Lean In, there was a huge media campaign to push this book and get her to celebrity status. Coincidentally, the few women in the Washington, D.C. office were expected to help the campaign by doing administrative tasks that help their bosses but don't actually pay. What Sarah comes to find out from working with Sheryl is that she has a big temper. She has blown up many times at people and berated and humiliated them. So because Sarah accompanies Sheryl on tour, she witnesses the following. Generally, her temper. She fires a makeup artist when she doesn't like her hair and makeup. She gets pissed off when her kids are eating McDonald's, even though she will post a picture of her smiling with a burger on McDonald's. Like, that is just like a fake photo for optics, I guess. There's also another part early in Sarah's career in Facebook where the company has their first proactive initiative to build relationships with governments around the world, and they decide this first initiative will be organ donation. And this only happened because Sheryl had run into one of her Harvard friends who was a surgical director of liver transplantation, and she offered to help him source donors. So now they have to set up a global organ donation initiative. The problem is organ donation is not a universal practice. Some religions discourage it, some countries don't do it at all, and some make it impossible to distinguish from legitimate organ donation from the sale of human organs, not to mention organ theft and trafficking. So that's like a really strange and specific and complicated thing to choose as like the first proactive initiative. So Sarah has to tell Sheryl that they can only do a registration drive to push people to their local donation sites, but they can't match donors with patients or transport organs around the world. And they can't build patient registries or gather health information either. And this baffles Sheryl because she's like, why can't Facebook have a bigger role in collecting data and be a marketplace for organs? And Sarah's like, it's kind of complicated on a legal, cultural, and religious level when you're taking into account the whole fucking world. But Sheryl just looks at Sarah like she's an idiot because she's not looking at this as an opportunity to collect health data from users. And if we can't collect data from people, what's the point? Sarah tries explaining that countries put a lot of thought into safeguarding organ donation information and guarding against cross-border transportation of organs. Cheryl's reaction is this: do you mean to tell me that if my 4-year-old was dying and the only thing that would save her was a new kidney, that I couldn't fly to Mexico and get one and put it in my handbag? Girl, why the fuck are you writing fan fiction in your head about getting a random kid's heart in Mexico? This is a social media company. Why are we trying to harvest organs now? So then Sarah has to explain that countries generally have strict regulations to prevent black market sales or illegal harvesting of organs or body parts. And that's usually something determined by government policy instead of, who can just hand out money and pay the most to get organs. And this really pisses off Sheryl because, as we will see in future interactions, Sheryl is very used to getting what she wants. Since we're also talking about lean in and how women can have it all, this book also talks a lot about Sarah's experience with motherhood and being a working mom at Facebook. She feels pressure to return to work even before she uses up her maternity leave, and she doesn't know how to juggle this job with motherhood because when she has to travel for work, she has to take the baby and pay nannies to watch her, and when her job falls outside traditional work hours, the baby has to come with her. So this baby has been coming along with her when there's a rally in New York, when Facebook has to testify in Parliament in Canada, and even when she is detained at the border, and she was only let go when her husband had to make a phone call to satisfy border officials and let her back in the US. Other things she has to deal with include combining breastfeeding and working, which is extra complicated whenever she has to travel for work, especially for trips where she has to go to Colombia and drive for hours in the jungle with colleagues and no electricity or privacy. Or another time when she's flying to Turkey and realizes the airplane doesn't have outlets in the bathroom or outlets in the seat for her to plug in her pump, which would make her breasts swell very painfully for 10 hours until her shirt is so soaked by the time she lands. And then when she reaches the hotel, the electricity isn't even working and the workers don't understand what she's asking for because of the language barriers. Basically, it is extremely hard and stressful to be a mom, but to be a working and traveling mom, I would be having a mental breakdown every fucking day. So she thought that she was doing a good job in a difficult situation, trying to handle it all together, until the first performance review after maternity leave. Generally, the review is positive, but she notices the only negative feedback is about her baby, like how people can hear the baby in the background during phone calls. A few weeks after the review, Sheryl pulls Sarah aside and says she heard about Sarah's childcare situation. Hire a nanny, she instructs. Be smart and hire a Filipina nanny. Sarah, I'm telling you, they're English speaking, sunny disposition, and service orientated. Marnie echoes the sentiment. Both have at least one Filipina nanny in their retinue of staff. First of all, very weird thing to say, especially specifying Filipina nannies. But I think this behavior really shows that for all of the posturing that Sheryl does about being a working mom, it's very sanitized to edit out the role played by nannies and paid help who do the majority of the actual labor of raising children, which most working moms would not have the finances to afford. But Sheryl is using her status as a working mom to prove to people that this should only inspire you to work harder. She shares this anecdote from a holiday trip in a weekly update to other executives. Due to work issues and the time change, I wound up missing most or all breakfast and dinners as I was on the phone. During one of the last dinners, my kids came to find me. I was sitting in a staircase outside the restaurant on the phone. They looked upset and started to tell me that they thought I should be at the dinner, but I had to tell them that I had to finish the call and then talk. When I was off, I came to find them, expecting them to be upset. Instead, they gave me a big hug and said, "We just want to thank you for working so hard to help billions of people." I looked at Marnie, who was on vacation with us in another family, and asked what happened. Marnie had seen them upset and explained that she knew I did not want to miss meals, and I was upset too, but I had a job I needed to do, and they should be proud of me. It was a brilliant reframe that I know I will try again when I need it, and might help some of you when you need it for professional or personal reasons one day too. So hopefully from these anecdotes, you're getting the kind of vibe of this woman. I think her archetype of personality and the type of BS that she spouts, I'm sure is very common for a lot of women in positions of power like her. I think what really surprised me though from reading this book was the inappropriate behavior that she had with employees. So for context, Sheryl hires a lot of young graduates who fulfill a hybrid administrative/personal assistant role. One of them is named Sadie, who is a 26-year-old graduate. And one time, Sarah, Sadie, and Sheryl are on an international flight back from a business meeting. And on the plane, there is a separate room with a large bed in it, which is pretty much Cheryl's domain. So when they're on that plane, she announces to everyone that she's going to sleep and that they should sleep too so that they can adjust to the California time zone when they land. Sarah and Sadie don't want to do that because they have tons of work to do that they plan on just doing on the plane. We politely decline. Sheryl seems miffed that we're not taking her advice, but returns to her room and we return to our work. We're an hour out of Zurich when Sheryl emerges back into the cabin in her pajamas. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to bed." As if it isn't obvious that we're preparing all the emails that will go out under her name. "Lots to do," I say cheerily, "but it's better if you rest now so you can get back on California time," she insists. "I'm okay," I respond. There's only one bed in the jet and Sheryl is obviously using it. "Sarah, come to bed." Her tone hardens. I shake my head and she repeats her instructions. "Sarah, come to bed." We're at a stalemate. I look around desperately for support from the others, but everyone's looking away. On the long drive from Davos to Zurich for the flight, Sheryl and Sadie had taken turns sleeping in each other's laps, occasionally stroking each other's hair, while I tried to make myself as small and invisible as possible, feeling uncomfortable with what I was seeing. I make pleading eyes at Sadie, hoping she might be up for another close moment with Sheryl. Sadie shakes her head. Sheryl sees this silent exchange and snaps, "Sadie slept over lots of times and I'm not asking Sadie, I'm asking you." I don't want to do this for all the obvious reasons. It wouldn't be right for a male COO to ask for this, and it's not right for a female one. I tell her no, I can't. But people say no to Sheryl so rarely. She doesn't know what to do with this. She retreats to her bed, making no effort to hide her frustration and resentment. I know something has broken between us. I know consequences will follow, but I don't know what they'll be. Sadie tries to console me. She tells me things will be fine, but there are unspoken rules with Sheryl about obedience and closeness. Those closest to Sheryl are rewarded. Marnie and Sadie often appear in her unwanted designer clothes, both assumed plum seats on on boards that Sheryl had been asked to serve on. There are courtside basketball tickets and introduction to celebrities. Sheryl lends them the keys to her vacation homes. Sadie is very conscious of the benefits of being Sheryl's little doll, as she calls it, and having Sheryl tell her she loves her. Sheryl recently instructed Sadie to buy lingerie for both of them with no budget, and Sadie obeyed, spending over $10,000 on lingerie for Sheryl and $3,000 on herself. When Sadie tries another of the bras Sheryl purchased her for the first time, she emails her. This bra is incredibly beautiful and fits perfectly. So grateful. This is my breast equivalent of flying privately for the first time. Happy to treat your breasts as they should be treated, Sheryl responds. Sadie confides she's never spent this much on single items of underwear in her life, messaging Sheryl that the experience is a total pretty woman moment. I feel like the fanciest 26-year-old in the world. Sheryl responds by asking her 26-year-old assistant to come to her house to try on the underwear and have dinner. Later, the invite becomes one to stay over, lean in, and lie back. At times, Sadie shares with me how stressed out she is about her relationship with Sheryl. I urge her to find a new job somewhere else, where her life would be less enmeshed with Sheryl's. She says she shared her concerns with Elliot and another senior manager, and they've also counseled her to escape from Sheryl. When the plane lands in California, it's pouring rain. We stand scattered around the jet with Sheryl's black car idling nearby. Sheryl walks purposefully toward me. I think she'll make a conciliatory gesture or extend a thank you for what was a challenging but successful week at Davos. I raise my umbrella politely and she leans in close. You should have got into bed. Then she turns her back and stalks off toward the waiting car. I just stand there, rain soaking into my hair. I'm reading this shit and I'm like, what in the super villain scene am I reading right now? What do you mean this lady is talking menacingly before dramatically leaving in the rain? So at this point, Sarah's like, oh, I'm probably gonna have to leave this job. Thing is, she cannot quit right now because at this point, she is weeks away from giving birth with her second kid. She's also going through a complicated process trying to get American citizenship before her husband's visa runs out and they have to leave the country. She tells two other coworkers what happened and they both tell her not to tell that story to anyone. She then tells a third coworker who is underwhelmed by my fears, telling me that half the department has been in Sheryl's bed by now. She is joking like, hey, this is less of a big deal than you think and you're less of a big deal than you think, and trying to reassure me. But it doesn't help. I start to notice Sheryl icing me out. Now we cut to Sarah giving birth to her second kid in 2016. The baby is healthy, but Sarah is losing a lot of blood and her shaking turns to convulsions, and this becomes a medical emergency. She is in a bunch of pain and she feels like she's gonna die, and she basically gets a bunch of needles put into her and passes out. Later on, when she wakes up, they won't let her hold her baby anymore because she can't even hold up a pen to sign any of the forms. That is how badly she's doing right now. So she gets put in intensive care on life support. And it turns out that she suffered an amniotic fluid embolism and had to get more than 35 blood transfusions. So this was literally a near-death experience. Even the recovery process afterward is extremely painful. She can't walk because her back was damaged when they were moving her between hospitals. She's still losing blood and becomes very weak from it. There's a moment where she hemorrhages while she is putting her kid to bed and she gets put back in the hospital for 2 days. Even months afterward, when this all happened, she is still losing significant amounts of blood and struggling to do basic activities. She'll be going to the grocery store and she won't even have the strength to walk through the aisles. Despite being hit by the fucking struggle bus for several months, none of this seems to matter to Joel Kaplan. He knows that she is still on maternity leave and is on strong pain medication. But despite this, he still sends her messages and emails that pile up daily. Less than 2 weeks after she's discharged from the hospital, he sets up a weekly video conference meeting with her. He starts to take them sprawled across his bed rather than in his office. He's in a t-shirt and who knows what else. I tell myself I shouldn't feel weird about it. Does me being in bed when we chat make you feel uncomfortable? He asks repeatedly, and it's hard not to feel that's the point. One day he pushes further. On one of our regular video calls during my maternity leave, he asks me how my health is. I keep my answer brisk and professional. I'm still very sick. I'm going to need more surgery. But where are you bleeding from? He asks. My mind erases. There's no way he doesn't know. Seriously? Well, it's the same place I've been losing blood from all along. What place? He presses, insistent. Do we have to go into this? He stares me down from his bed, propped up by voluminous pillows, and asks again about where the blood is coming from. I'm not really comfortable. Come on, Sarah, he pushes. Well, it's not my eyes. He starts to get angry. I have to go. I exit the video conference and call Tom. Then I call Debbie and tell her too. I trust her and she's been at Facebook for years. She has no advice for me. Can we just take a moment to ask, why the fuck would you be asking these kind of questions? Like, this is so fucking weird. It's already an insult to be having these weekly meetings while she's on maternity leave, but to like try to pressure someone to say that they're bleeding from their fucking vagina is very much weirdo behavior. Then, while she's still on maternity leave, Joel presses her to join a leadership offsite in India that's scheduled a few weeks after she returns to work. So if you've ever been to a company offsite, they're generally a waste of time. The focus is on team building with lots of tourism and meals, but not about making any real decisions. So she's like, this doesn't really feel necessary. And also, I'm really fucking scared about making a 20-hour flight to India while I'm still losing tons of blood and the doctors don't know why this is still happening. By the time her return to work date comes closer, she is still recovering slowly and has unresolved issues, and she just keeps on hemorrhaging unexpectedly. On India, I start nervously. I know you want me to, but so I'm planning to go if I can figure out a way not to wean my daughter. Although if you don't need me, I'd prefer to stay. You mean breastfeeding? He asks. Yes, I say. Explain breastfeeding to me. He looks expectantly at me. What? Explain breastfeeding to me. I need to keep up my supply in order to continue breastfeeding, I say as neutrally as possible, trying to keep things professional, but this doesn't satisfy him. He continues to push. Hello? Can we put this guy in Brazilian jail? Again, big fucking weirdo. Eventually, Sarah shuts the conversation down by telling him that she will explain her concerns to his assistant. She tells the assistant how badly her previous experiences were when she was traveling after her first child and the airline did not have any outlets to plug in her breast pump and so many other issues, but this persuades no one and she is sent a breast pump and booked for India. So she returns to work in August 2016. On her first day back, Joel decides to do a performance review. But if you Google this, you'll see that employees are not supposed to be given a performance review of their maternity leave, and pushing someone to work during their maternity leave is against the law. But clearly this guy doesn't give a shit. He really wants to give a negative review to Sarah and says, you weren't responsive enough. To which she responds, in my defense, I was in a coma for some of it. It's not just me, Sarah. Some of your other colleagues found it challenging to engage with you. I mean, you know, I was in hospital in a coma and near death, but I accept that this did make it hard to engage with me at times. Irrespective, this leads him to conclude that there were issues limiting my effectiveness, and both he and my peers say I was difficult to work with during this period. Again, hello? I get you don't want your employees to be napping during a Zoom call, so maybe your employee having a coma is like the ultimate nap, but surely we can give this lady a fucking break before she hemorrhages again. Again, this is happening on her first day back. She reaches out to HR and tells them that she had to work a lot during maternity leave. HR tells her they're aware, and then she realizes they've known all this time. She thought Joel had been doing this and nobody knew, but apparently they did. And so she explains that she's worried she will start hemorrhaging again during the 40 hours in the air, and the idea of traveling to India while she still has medical issues is causing a lot of stress at home. The HR lady says, you can fly with me, that way if anything goes wrong, you will have someone on board. But that's not really helpful considering that the HR lady is just a random colleague and not someone with a medical degree who could actually help her if there were a medical emergency. So she goes to India, and at the opening strategy meeting, Joel gathers the leadership team and asks everyone to identify the biggest risks for the company over the coming year. And when it gets to Sarah's turn, she talks about how there is a disturbing new trend in how politicians are using Facebook. For example, a journalist discovered that the new president of the Philippines had weaponized Facebook to propel himself into power. He was an outsider candidate running against insiders, but using paid ads and a network of social media volunteers. His campaign has spread misinformation and made political pages look like credible sources of information. He also used bots, fake accounts, and trolls on social media to make people feel more doubtful and uncertain and confused. And essentially his campaign harnessed Facebook's algorithm, which optimizes for eyeballs and doesn't care to distinguish between fact and fiction. Sound kind of familiar for the Americans watching at home, right? The journalist who published this, Maria Ressa, brought the information to Sarah's team before publication while she was on maternity leave, but her bosses did nothing. This is a concern because this new president in the Philippines said that he would enforce law and order by having death squads who have killed over 1,000 people, and he has praised these murders publicly. publicly. And he's not the only leader using Facebook this way. There are juntas in Thailand and Myanmar who are also using it to suppress speech and incite fear and spy on our citizens. And they falsely claim that Facebook shares user info and data with them to suppress dissent on platform. It's at this point that regimes that want control and censorship of their populations have understood that they can use Facebook to monitor what's being said about them and who is saying it. And now with this new president of the Philippines being successful in getting his position, naturally other people will want to imitate it. So Sarah's like, listen, we've been cozying up to these candidates and making money off of them. Maybe we should rethink this thing. This is the moment that she loses the room because everyone is just giving her like blank looks. And Joel says, thanks, Sarah. I think we've got a few more immediate things to worry about. We'll let the US team handle the US elections. It's pretty clear that they're not interested in messing with what they got going on for US elections because they are making records amount of money off the Trump campaign with all the misinformation and trolling. If anything, it's actually great how much money that they bring in, and more money is always the goal, right? Joel doesn't seem to care at all. It's all money, and what harm does it do? He tells us it's clear Clinton's going to win anyway. And of course, we know that that is wrong because Trump ended up winning the 2016 election. And so the morning after Trump's victory, there is a meeting for the policy and communications team to discuss how everyone feels about the outcome. And there's a vague opening monologue about the importance of democracy and tolerance. Joel, of course, is totally upbeat and visibly happy about Trump. A Republican on the DC team had told me that Joel had cut checks for everyone except Trump. And Joel admitted that he hadn't voted for Trump. So I asked him later in our one-on-one why he was so joyful on the call when he was a very public Jeb Bush supporter. You're looking at the election all wrong. Joel's tone is mildly patronizing. If you look at Trump's agenda, it's the Republican agenda. It's the things we want, the things I want. It's tax cuts. It's less government. He'll get it done. Trump's got the Senate. He's got the House. It's a decisive victory. He can do things, great things. Not only that, it's going to be great for tech and for business. Hands off, all systems go. One of the younger employees in California raises her hand and says timidly, I worry for my friends who are Black and Hispanic. She doesn't mention how all lives matter, a slogan created as a negative rejoinder to Black Lives Matter, keeps popping up on the Facebook graffiti walls all across campus, or that Mark and Cheryl's response was that we have to assume positive intent, or the Trump supporters welcome posters that materialize everywhere. Most of the employees at headquarters are in their 20s. They're on Facebook all the time posting their political opinions, so there's been a roiling political tension at the company for months. Joel shuts down these concerns, stating firmly, there are a lot of good guys in the Trump administration who want to do what's best for America. The gag is, leading up to the elections, the company had internally been calling this the Facebook election, and they had committed to dominating this election like they have never done before. There were teams across policy, communications, sales, product management, and engineering who were working full-time on the elections. And for months in presentations, there would be people who would talk about how powerful Facebook was and how effective it is as a tool to influence people and change minds, and that they are in the business of democracy. So in this meeting now, for them to talk about their feelings, someone in the back asks, is it our fault that this happened? He pushes off the question as if the mere suggestion is preposterous. Facebook's role and our role as employees is to make the world more open and connected. That's never been more important than it is now, Elliot concludes, and then shuts down the meeting before any follow-up questions are asked. These are the same sentiments that Mark says at a conference a few days later, where he says that suggesting fake news on Facebook had influenced elections is a pretty crazy idea. So later on, Mark and Sarah leave for Peru to attend a summit. Mark arrives to the airport in a really pissed off mood because people didn't react well to his statement about denying that Facebook didn't influence the elections. And what doesn't help his bad mood is that he also didn't bring his passport. So now people have to go around the terminal to find rental cars instead of taking the private jet. Mark's pissed off. By now, I can't work out whether it's just about the blame Facebook's getting for the election result, Trump's election, the forgotten passport, or having to go to Peru in the middle of it all. Irrespective, he blames other people for all of those things, including forgetting the passport. I guess that's what it's like to live in a bubble like Mark does. When you have so many other people doing things for you professionally and personally, you stop taking responsibility for any of it. Max Weber said that dealing with unintended consequences of your actions is what political responsibility is. This guy can't even take responsibility for leaving his passport at home, let alone influencing the US election. So one of the workers decides to take blame for this and says that it's her fault that the passport isn't here and she should have been supervising Mark's home staff more closely. Nobody really mentions that maybe Mark himself should have thought that a passport might be helpful when you're traveling to another country. Elliot then asks Sarah to contact the president of Peru to see whether they can get Mark in the country without his passport. And Sarah doesn't want to do that because it's like, why are we acting this person must be so special that he can be allowed to travel without a passport? Fortunately, before she is peer pressured into making the call to the president of Peru, Mark realizes he also doesn't have some of the medication he needs, so ultimately they push back the flight departure time while someone, not him, goes back home to get it. They finally board the private jet. He is still mad and cannot stop talking about the election and how when he said that it was a crazy idea that Facebook influenced it, his words were universally rejected and even made fun of, and he just can't stand that. He genuinely believes that Facebook didn't have any impact. So Elliot tries to pull Mark out of this denial so they can figure out what Mark is going to say about this moving forward. So during this 10-hour flight, he explains to Mark all of the ways that Facebook handed the election to Trump. Facebook embedded staff in Trump's campaign team in San Antonio for months, alongside Trump campaign programmers, ad copywriters, media buyers, network engineers, and data scientists. A Trump operative named Brad Parscale ran the operation together with the embedded Facebook staff, and he basically invented a new way for a political campaign to shitpost its way to the White House, targeting voters with misinformation, inflammatory posts, and fundraising messages. Boz, who led the ads team, described it as the single best digital ad campaign I've ever seen from any advertiser, period. Elliot walks Mark through all the ways that Facebook and Parscale's combined team micro-targeted users and tweaked ads for maximum engagement using data tools we designed for commercial advertisers. Trump's campaign had amassed a database named Project Alamo with profiles of over 220 million people in America. It charted all sorts of online and offline behavior, including gun registration, voter registration, credit card and shopping histories, what websites they visit, what car they drive, where they live, and the last time they voted. The campaign used Facebook's custom audiences from custom lists to match people in that database with their Facebook profiles. Then Facebook's lookalike audiences algorithm found people on Facebook with common qualities that look like those of known Trump supporters. So if Trump supporters liked, for example, a certain kind of pickup truck, the tool would find other people who liked pickup trucks but were not yet committed voters to show the ads to. Then they would pair their targeting strategy with data from their message testing. People likely to respond to build a wall got that sort of message. Moms worried about childcare got ads explaining that Trump wanted 100% tax-deductible childcare. Then there was a whole operation to constantly tweak the copy and the images and the color of the buttons that say donate, since slightly different messages resonate with different audiences. At any given moment, the campaign had tens of thousands of ads in play, millions of different ad variations by the time they were done. These ads were tested using Facebook's brand lift surveys, which measure whether users have absorbed the messages in the ads and tweaked accordingly. Many of these ads contained inflammatory misinformation that drove up engagement and drove down the price of advertising. The more people engage with an ad, the less it costs. Facebook's tools and in-house white glove service created incredibly accurate targeting of both message and audience, which is the holy grail of advertising. Trump heavily outspent Clinton on Facebook ads. In the weeks before the election, the Trump campaign was regularly one of the top advertisers on Facebook globally. His campaign could afford to do this because the data targeting enabled it to raise millions each month in campaign contributions through Facebook. In fact, Facebook was the Trump campaign's largest source of cash. Parscale's team also ran voter suppression campaigns. They were targeted at 3 different groups of Democrats: young women, white liberals who might like Bernie Sanders, and black voters. These voters got so-called dark posts, non-public posts that only they would see. They would be invisible to researchers or anyone else looking at their feed. The idea was feeding them stuff that will discourage them from voting for Hillary. One made for black audiences was a cartoon built around her 1996 soundbite that African Americans are super predators. In the end, black voters didn't turn out in the numbers that Democrats expected. In an election that came down to a small number of votes in key swing states, these things matter. Mark quietly takes it all in. At first, he's skeptical and pushing back, but that gradually turns into curiosity. He starts to ask questions, trying to understand the mechanics of it all. He doesn't seem upset that the platform would be used this way, not in the slightest. If anything, there's admiration for the ingenuity of it. Like, these tools were there all the time for anyone to use this way. How smart that they figured it out. Even Sheryl is impressed by it, because when all this was explained to Sheryl, once she grasped what Trump's campaign did, her immediate response was not horror, but that it was brilliant and innovative. And do you think we might have a shot at hiring Trump's guy, Brad Parscale, to come work at Facebook? No one said anything. After an awkward moment, chastened, she shifted gears. Of course that's silly. He can have his pick of jobs right now. A pause. But maybe there are others from the Trump campaign we could bring inside Facebook? Later on, they are at the conference where Mark is with the heads of state. These leaders are all in the business of getting elected. They probably believe Facebook was instrumental and they don't want to piss off the guy who made that happen. I'm sure that Trump's election elevated Mark in their eyes. He's the power broker and they want to stay in power. So they spend the session complimenting Mark and suggesting ways they can work together with Facebook. Mark doesn't really seem to absorb all of the kiss-assing that he's getting though, because he just seems to be preoccupied with thinking about something else. He's like making vague, non-committal responses and like kind of appearing distracted. Obama hadn't made it to the round table. When we told Mark he was double booked, Mark responded, "I guess it doesn't matter. He's a lame duck anyway." So he's acting like he doesn't care, but he probably does, because when they first started planning this trip to Peru, he was so fixated on traveling to Machu Picchu with Obama as a farewell road trip, as if this was something that Sarah could just add into the agenda. But Sarah guesses this might be what he is very distracted about, the fact that Obama isn't here. And he offers to drive across Lima to meet Obama. So they go to a town hall where Obama is speaking, and Sarah and other people are not allowed to accompany Mark into the meeting. So they just wait outside until later Mark bursts out of the building and just marches away pissed off. Fake news. He kept going on about fake news and misinformation. Mark steams. He doesn't get it. He's got it totally wrong, totally out of proportion. He said that Facebook's playing a destructive role globally, and I think he actually believes that. Not taking it seriously. That's what he said. I'm not taking these threats seriously enough. Mark quivers, furious. I told him fake news wasn't a big thing on Facebook. It's less than 1% of what's on the platform, that it wasn't fake news that swung the election for Trump, and that realistically there's not an easy solution. I mean, what does he want me to do? Elliot agrees. I think we would very quickly run into free speech issues with any action we take. And you know what Obama's focused on? Mark says incredulously. The next election already. They've only just lost this one, Elliot says. Yeah, he said he was warning me that we need to make serious changes or things are going to get worse in the next presidential race, Mark says. He's so angry that he keeps on replaying the conversation and repeating it to himself because he's so pissed off at being criticized. And he reiterates again and again how Obama is a lame duck. And Sarah notes that under his anger, she can tell that Mark is genuinely hurt. And she thinks that he had actually liked and respected Obama. So this was a big ego bruise, especially considering he is not used to criticism from anyone more powerful than him. But there are so few who fit that description anyway. Mark broods for much of the flight. When he suggests a board game, I agree to play explicitly on the condition that I don't have to let him win. He thinks I'm joking. When I trounce him at Ticket to Ride, he accuses me of cheating. He challenges me to Settlers of Catan. A couple of other staffers join. I win. He does it again. You definitely cheated that time, he says loudly. You know, I think if I were Sarah in this situation, I would just jump off of that private jet myself. Like, what do you mean that your job is both the director of public policy and a babysitter for this man-child? Imagine having an ego so fragile that you can't handle losing a board game without saying that the other person cheated. That's the kind of person who threw the election for Trump. So welcome to America, you guys. So this is a time when Trump has won. When he is inaugurated in Washington, thousands of women are in the streets protesting and hundreds of other cities join in. I remember protesting that day too. It was like the largest single day demonstration in US history. And while this is happening, Sarah is on a private jet with Sheryl. When Sheryl emerges from the bedroom hours later, I'm excited to fill her in on the largest women's protest in our lifetimes. She's fresh off a Davos panel about women's leadership where Elliot called her the unofficial self-appointed world dean of women. Sheryl picks over some fresh cut fruit that's been arranged for her, still in her pajamas, which are silky and perfectly tailored. I breathlessly start to tell her about the history she missed while she slept. She looks bored immediately. I press on about the Women's March, how people are marching everywhere, tiny towns, red states and blue, and not just in America. She cuts me off, changing the subject to her weekend plans, meeting up with friends, the possibility of going dancing sometime in the future, redecorating her ski house, something about her apartment in Los Angeles, and some story about her boyfriend Bobby and how he's trying to buy a private jet or a staff for a private jet or something. She seemingly could not care less. Sadie starts in with, "Don't you think it's amazing?" when Sheryl shuts her down. She's not even a little bit curious. "You're gonna come dancing with us, aren't you, Sadie?" Sadie gives me a look that tells me to drop it. There's silence while Sheryl sips her champagne and picks at the cake. "What was she wearing?" Sheryl asks. I'm so relieved that she's engaging that I don't totally understand the question. I start to tell her about the pink hats that are showing up in marches all around the world. Sadie's making eyes at me to stop. No, not that, she scolds. "What did Melania wear?" Girl, fuck Melania. What the fuck? Fortunately, there are women at Facebook that do seem to care. There are nearly 200 female employees who work under Sheryl who have created a secret Facebook group called the Feminist Fight Club, or the FFC. They talk about women's issues there. Unfortunately, there's this one time where managers management's solution was announcing a hashtag ally bot, a bot that promotes ally behaviors within the company by letting you thank your colleagues for being allies. A top aide for the chief technology officer explains that the bot is for men to use when they see other men supporting women. If I'm in a meeting and I see another dude be an ally, I could say, hey, that was great, keep that up. The bot gives the recipient a shiny new ally badge on their internal Facebook profile once their name has been added with the hashtag ally in the ally bot. So the bot keeps score of this and links it to the performance review system, which means that men will receive a highly visible input to the system that affects pay, promotions, and stock options. And this can be easily gamed by men who just decide to hand each other an ally hashtag. So when the FFC found out that this was intended to incentivize and reward men and not women, they had that secret group chat to vent to each other about it. And so it is nice to feel solidarity with women pointing out that this is just a system that gives a bunch of credit to men for hitting the bare minimum of decency. Yay, you didn't sexually harass someone. Have a cookie. Sarah decides that she is going to do something about Joel Kaplan. I tell Elliot about Joel's behavior, Joel's scheduling meetings and work for me during maternity leave, and the systemic problems of sexual harassment across his department. Elliot seems both unsurprised and unconcerned. He listens to me, nods along, says next to nothing. When I'm done talking, he tells me he's sure all of this is solvable and will work itself out. And the meeting's over. He couldn't make it clearer that he doesn't want any part of this. I rise and walk to the door. Elliot starts typing on his laptop. And if it doesn't work itself out, I ask. Elliot looks up from his laptop and stares me straight in the eyes. Well, that would be a shame, but I'd be happy to write you a reference. It lands like a physical blow. So after this, Sarah sees another way that she can take action because there is a separate investigation going on where Facebook lawyers are looking into what Facebook is doing in the Philippines, and she realizes that she can put some things on the record with the company lawyers just in case Elliot fires her. So she tells them about Joel's behavior and the fact that he made her work during maternity leave and that she has already informed Elliot. And then within days, one of Joel's team invites her out for a drink. This person is basically Joel's mouthpiece. So this invite is kind of like a way for a message to be delivered. And so they meet at a bar and they chat. And then this person casually asks, how's the investigation going? Sarah plays dumb because the investigation is supposed to be confidential. Undeterred, they say, Joel is loyal to his people. He looks after them. He's a Marine. He values loyalty. The message seems to be, Joel won't fire me if I keep my mouth shut. So Sarah goes back to Elliot and asks him if she shuts down this investigation, will Joel's creepy behavior stop? He nods yes. She goes back to the investigator and says that since Joel sent a message to her about loyalty, she does not wish to trigger an investigation. Unfortunately, the retaliations from Joel happens pretty much immediately. He informs her that he is splitting her job in half, where she can choose between running Asia or Latin America, but she can't have both anymore. He doesn't give an explanation for why this is happening, but that's just how it is. So between those two options, the one that has more responsibility and growth and importance for the business would be Asia. But Joel insists that if she picks Asia, she will have to run China as part of the job, and he knows how strongly she opposes Facebook's China policy and doesn't want anything to do with it. Sarah can't bring herself to work on China, and so she decides to run Latin America and Canada, where there is less responsibility and importance. This surprises Joel and Elliot because they expected her to take China and force her to submit. So then they counter that they will only give her the smaller job if she leads the search to find someone to run Asia. So for the time being, she will continue to run Asia. Yet, even in this interim period, they insist that she works on China. So it's kind of like, she's stuck with this shit anyway. So now that we're talking about China again, let's get back into the messiness that happened there. So back in 2017, Facebook's advertising business in China is growing, even though they are blocked over there because Chinese businesses are buying ads on Facebook and targeting ads to people outside of China. So this makes them Facebook's second largest market after the US, with an estimated $5 million revenue at this time. And as we all know, they fucking love their money over here. So China is a really big deal for them. Sarah takes over the day-to-day running of Facebook's China policy from Joel, and she is sifting through random documents to understand the situation. And this is where she shares the tea with us in this book, literally writing down what was in the documents that she had found. So there's this one pitch that Facebook put together to be allowed back in China. And the key offer that they provide is to help promote safe and secure social order, which essentially means surveillance. There's another document where they are talking about the pros and cons about who will do the surveillance on Facebook in China? Who's going to use Facebook's technology to search for faces at the government's request? And who is going to turn the people in? Is it going to be Facebook, or is it going to be outsourced to a third-party Chinese company? So there's a pros and cons list as Facebook deliberates on whether they should do it themselves. I think you can imagine what the pros of this would be from a business perspective and from like an evil villain perspective. But one of the cons that is listed says Facebook employees will be responsible for user data responses that could lead to death, torture, and incarceration, which seems bad, but somehow keeps getting worse. In the edit notes, I see that Joel has edited out the part about death, torture, and incarceration and replaced it in the final document. So instead, it reads, Facebook employees will be responsible for directly responding to requests for data from a government that does not respect international standards for human rights. Then the Chinese government decides that Facebook needs a Chinese partner if they want to operate in China. So they bring in a Chinese private equity firm. This team would deliver user data that the government requests and monitor all content in China with the authority to remove the content even if it doesn't originate in China. Facebook would build facial recognition and photo tagging and other moderation tools to facilitate Chinese censorship. And these tools would let the Chinese government review all public posts and private messages of Chinese users, including messages they get from users outside of China. This kind of government access to user data is something that Facebook had fought against providing to the US government, even after receiving national security letters demanding it. So for example, when Edward Snowden revealed that the NSA had hacked into Facebook to spy on its users back in 2013, Mark called President Obama to express frustration over government surveillance. He and Joel even went to the White House to meet with Obama over it. So now it's just very ironic that he's offering a way better deal to China. They know none of this looks good. Facebook was so worried about a leak, they wanted a contact at the CAC for leak coordination, because if it leaks, we won't be able to keep doing what we're doing. One risk assessment document contemplates how word might get out. A disgruntled current or former employee leaks additional details about how we are treating data to highlight differences in what we say to the public versus what we do. But what did they mean when they worried about highlighting differences in what we say to the public versus what we do? And since they know how bad their plans are going to look, they write hypothetical headlines for what the news coverage might be and run focus groups on these headlines with Facebook users in different cities. They spend millions of dollars for groups who will be supportive of the China launch and groups they want to fund in order to neutralize organizations that might criticize Facebook, like Human Rights Watch and Reporters Without Borders. Mark is also coached with talking points for how to answer Congress when he gets questioned and to make sure to not directly admit that Facebook wrote the censorship software in collaboration with the Chinese Communist Party. So in April of 2018, when he is asked about China in a Senate hearing, he says, "We are not in a position to know exactly how the government would seek to apply its laws and regulations." And Sarah straight up says in her book, this is not true. The Chinese Communist Party has told them directly how it would apply to its laws and regulations, and Facebook has developed technology and tools to meet their requirements and tested them together with the CCP. Then Mark says, no decisions have been made around the conditions under which any possible future service might be offered in China. He lies. After the congressional hearing, Facebook's stock price rises. But now let's switch over to another country where shit really went down. That is Myanmar. So since the first time I mentioned Sarah's visit back in 2013, over the years, the country went from having no internet to everyone on mobile, where Facebook is the internet for nearly everyone because the company made deals with local telecoms to preload the phones with their app. And a lot of the phone plans, the time that you spend on Facebook doesn't count towards your minutes. So everyone is really integrated into Facebook. And as a result, we can see how badly things have gone. It starts with hate speech about Muslim minorities living there. Sarah's policy team asked the content team that's responsible for removing hate speech, hey, can you guys remove the racist shit that's being written about Muslim minorities? But then that team says no, because they only have 4 or 5 reports of hate speech in the queue that gets reported. And since there's such little reports that they see, they're not going to do anything about it. A few months later, a riot is then triggered by a viral Facebook post that falsely claims claims a Muslim man raped a Buddhist woman. So the junta blocks Facebook and tells them to remove the post because it's causing riots. Buddhist mobs are attacking Muslim shops, people are getting murdered. But the content operations team, which is based in Ireland, doesn't want to take down the post. The case officer doesn't think that it violates the rules, but at the same time, she can't find anyone who speaks Burmese, and Google Translate doesn't do Burmese, so she can't really say for sure. Sarah pulls in someone more senior to reach out to a Burmese contractor based in Ireland to review the material. 5 hours pass. There are still riots going on during those 5 hours. Sarah's like, hey, how long do you think this is gonna take? The senior guy that she reached out to says, I have no idea. I messaged the guy in Ireland, but he's offline. Hopefully at some point he'll see my message. Sarah's like, do you have a phone number for this guy? This is an emergency. So the senior guy calls the Burmese contractor in Ireland, who says he'll go home and get access to a computer in 15 minutes. In reality, 2 hours pass. The senior guy then confesses that the contractor does not have his work laptop and he himself is on the road, but he'll get to it when he gets home later. Sarah's like, okay, when can you do this? Because we really need to move quickly. There are literally people getting killed on the streets here. She receives no response, so then she finds out a way to get other people to take down the post from California. But in order to do that, they need the senior guy to send them the links that have been reported. So finally, he sends them the links, the 3 posts are removed, and 4 minutes later, they get a notification that Facebook was unblocked in Myanmar, despite it being 4:30 a.m. over there. So basically, Myanmar had riots in the streets and people were getting killed, and Facebook's system to get anything done was dependent on some random contractor in Ireland who was out at dinner and couldn't find his laptop. Based on this experience, Sarah tells leadership and the content teams that they need to rethink how to handle Myanmar, but this does not go over well. The head of the content team emails that her people did exactly what they were supposed to do. The content on his face did not violate our policies. Those 3 posts contain factual reports and calls to political action, not hate speech. I point out that this doesn't matter under our own guidelines, which state clearly that we remove content when we perceive a genuine risk of physical harm or a direct threat to public safety. Triggering real-world violence like riots violates our rules. They think they can ignore this because it's happening in Myanmar, but as with the elections, if Facebook can enable it in one place, the pattern will surely repeat unless it is actively prevented. This gets me nowhere. The head of content policy doesn't want to do more training and doesn't see anything wrong with how this was handled. Then in June of 2015, Sarah's team starts noticing that users appear to be using unofficial Facebook apps that don't offer a reporting function. So then they learned that the official Facebook app is still available for download in Myanmar, which resulted in unofficial versions of the app getting shared through friends and mobile shops. So now it seems even more impossible to report hate speech or content intended to trigger violence, which explains why there were so many complaints from the junta and activists and civilians all complaining about fake news and hacked account and violent content, while the content team told Sarah back in 2014 that they only had 4 to 5 reports in the queue. Even in the few cases that managed to get through, nobody took action because they didn't see that it was a big deal. So in the end, people in Myanmar clicked on a button and nothing happened. Then in May, Sarah's team realizes that one of the 2 Burmese contractors doing the content moderation in Ireland is allowing racist content onto the site, including slurs for Muslims and posts calling for people's blood. He's removing more posts by civil society groups and peace activists than government and anti-Muslim accounts. Sarah's team raises this concern with the content team, who tell them there's nothing to worry about. They tell their bosses, nothing happens. They say, okay, if you're not going to deal with a moderator, can you at least ban the slur for Muslims? But then they get told no. Facebook doesn't actually ban the slur until years later after the damage has already been done. So Sarah's like, okay, we need to get someone in Myanmar like on the ground to figure this shit out. But at the same time, she knows that leadership isn't going to be convinced unless she can hire a senior person that follows the unspoken rules of nepotism. Because as we know from how they hire these people, it's just based on whoever they're already friendly with, aka whoever already looks like them. If you want someone to actually influence the policy and political decisions that are ultimately made by Joel and Elliot, they'll have a greater chance of success if they're male, older, white, and a Harvard graduate. Facebook's leaders want someone just like them. The ultimate trump card is if they're friends with Joel, Elliot, Marnie, Sheryl, or especially Mark. A few years ago, one of the Republicans in DC office, an old Capitol Hill veteran with a dry sense of humor, sat me down to explain. Sarah, you know your boss Joel. He's a Jew who went to Harvard. Yes, I said uneasily. And his boss? Elliot? Yes, a Jew who went to Harvard. And his boss? a Jew who went to Harvard, and her boss, a Jew who dropped out of Harvard, I venture. You're catching on, he said. So you see, one of these things is not like the other. You mean me? Yeah, he said. You're not like these people, and you'll never be like them. And the sooner you grasp this, the better. Facebook is an elite product born in an elite college, fronted by elite Harvard grads who show up for other elite Harvard grads who are decision makers in all sorts of places. So Sarah's like, okay, I'm gonna continue to be ignored, so I will hire a Harvard man who can fix this because at least people will listen to him. She finds a human rights expert based in Thailand who went to Harvard and is a friend of Elliot's. They have an opening in Thailand for him to fill in that she can expand to include Myanmar, which is perfect because now she can get around the fact that it would have been impossible to convince Facebook's leadership to hire someone just for Myanmar. We already know they don't give a shit about Myanmar. Unfortunately, the process of hiring this guy drags on for months. So one day she has a meeting with Joel and says, hey, look, it's time to make things happen. Everybody signed off on him. Let's just do it. And then for the first time throughout this long process, Joel says, Sarah, it's time to move on and get over it. And his reason for that is that it would be wrong to install her guy in this job because she's only in charge of Asia temporarily. Ultimately, he tells her not to raise this issue again. And then in late August, the military in Myanmar murder at least 10,000 people in a genocide, including children. What the world will learn later is that the military has set up a massive operation, at least 700 people, to spread misinformation and hate on Facebook. This was revealed by a reporter named Paul Moser in the New York Times. Sources in the military secret operation told him how they created and took over verified accounts that had huge followings, fan accounts for pop stars and celebrities, the Facebook page for a military hero, and used them to pump out false inflammatory posts. Troll accounts run by the military helped spread the content, shout down critics, and fuel arguments between commenters to rile people up. As Moser points out, it's among the first examples of an authoritarian government using the social network against its own people. The UN report on the human rights violation in Myanmar has over 20 pages to the role that Facebook played in spreading hate. And when you really look at everything, it is undeniable that Myanmar would have been better off if Facebook had never arrived there. I spent a lot of time thinking about what unfolded next in Myanmar and Facebook's complicity. It wasn't because of some grander vision or any malevolence toward Muslims in the country, nor a lack of money. My conclusion, it was just that Joel, Elliot, Sheryl, and Mark didn't give a fuck. Joel was a veteran of George W. Bush's White House. An issue in Syria would be met by a wave of his hand and drop a bomb on it. I don't care. A joke, but also who he was. He was the man in charge of those countries for Facebook, and when it came to Myanmar, those people just didn't matter to him. Not only is this story so terrible, but it also parallels a lot to what's going on right now. Think about all of the misinformation and bots and spam that's all over Twitter ever since Elon Musk bought it. Think about the genocide that's happening in Palestine and how the US is tied to Israel. Think about the posts that you see online and how very deliberate it is that certain things get pushed to you and certain things don't on social media. And all of this is targeted specifically to you. We are literally just repeating the same shit all over again in the 2020s compared to the 2010s. It's just different countries and different brown people getting killed. And after everything that's happened, from workplace harassment, Trump's victory, global issues, now trust is gone between the employees and leadership at Facebook. People feel like they're complicit, and employees are asking if they can be moved to different teams where they could try to not be morally implicated. People who are even looking for jobs tell recruiters to never contact them again because they will never work for Facebook. Despite this, leadership doesn't seem to get it. Sheryl even complains after meeting a new group of interns that they're focusing on the wrong questions like morality and culture instead of business. After Trump begins his term, Joel and Elliot set up diversity sessions to address the discontent over race and gender bias, which I'm sure you can imagine are pretty bland and don't actually do anything. So it's quite surprising in the middle of one of these meetings when an FFC member speaks up. What responsibility does Facebook have when one of its employees have sexually harassed another? Before Joel can answer, one of the other senior men in the room jumps in. When will women focus on work and stop talking about diversity already? That shuts it down. The room seems to deflate. One of the HR staff launches into some boring process response about who to report sexual harassment to and how seriously Facebook takes it, and we move on. Nothing is going to change. I think many of the employees are fine with that. Most of the company is made up of white and Asian men who don't seem to have a problem with how things have been. Even the office feels different. One day, there's a commotion in the large open space where the policy team works. I run over from my desk and see a woman convulsing on the floor. She's foaming at the mouth and her face is bleeding. She must have hit something when she fell from her desk, and she's being completely ignored. She's surrounded by desks and people at computers, and no one's helping her. Everyone types busily on their keyboards, pretending nothing is happening. She's spasming violently, bringing her dangerously close to mobile filing drawers with sharp metal edges. I and two members of the FFC, who are both relatively new to the team, push aside the furniture and call 911, but can't provide the basic information the dispatcher needs. History of seizures, the woman's age, her name. Are you her manager? I ask ask a woman at a nearby desk who seems to be studiously concentrating on her computer while a woman convulses in pain at her feet. "Yes, but I'm very busy," she says brusquely. "Are you serious? What's her name? Does she have epilepsy? How can we help her?" The woman looks surprised. "She's a contractor. I don't have that sort of information. Her contract's coming to an end soon. I suggest you call HR." "We do. They refer to a company that manages contractors. The representative for that company doesn't pick up." The woman continues to convulse. Sarah thinks about how this is not what it was like to work here when she began in 2011. People used to be proud to work here. This place used to be boisterous and happy, and now everyone seems detached and shut down. Now, a person we wish would shut down is Joel Kaplan. He has been interviewing for a cabinet position with Trump while remaining at Facebook and weighing in on policy and product issues. So all decisions about political speech, content, and algorithm go through Joel. His behavior towards Sarah also gets worse. For example, at the opening night reception of an offsite, he drops a napkin in front of her. He waits and stares at me till I figure out that he's expecting me to kneel to the ground and pick it up for him. He makes weird comments about Tom. "Is Tom gonna let you out tonight? You're going home to Tom now?" Tom is Sarah's husband, by the way. She goes to the dance floor to get space away from him. He comes over later to join in on the dancing until he's now dancing behind her and grinding into her. After that, she redoubles her efforts to find another job while asking to be moved to a different department. Elliot and I meet in his office. He admits that he knows it's been tough for me with Joel. Then he blindsides me by asking whether my new role with Javi will involve working with the policy team at all, because that might be a problem. That's when I understand he's not going to let me do this. "I don't want to put you in a bad position," I tell him. "I'm trying to do the best thing by everyone. You know me. I'm just trying to do my job. I've behaved with integrity throughout all this, and I don't think that can be said of everyone, and it seems unjust that I should have to leave my job with nothing to go to because of Joel's behavior." To which Elliot says, "I'm gonna have to let HR know," which Sarah assumes to mean that he's gonna dismiss her. And so she tells him, "Look, we had a deal. I was shut up about Joel's behavior and stop the investigation, and you were supposed to make this behavior stop. Now things have only gotten worse." But Elliot doesn't take the bait. In fact, all throughout this conversation, he's careful to say very little. So later on, Facebook's chief employment lawyer tells Sarah they're opening an investigation into her experience with Joel. Conveniently after, Elliot then tells Sarah that he has concerns about her performance. He says the main performance issue is that Sarah didn't hire people and expand her team fast enough. But in reality, Sarah has hired many people and built a large team around the world. It's just recently that Joel has been the final decision maker and blocking her hires. In the end, the investigation concludes that the challenges she had with Joel were found to be a result of communication issues and concerns about her performance. So somehow it just ended up being her fault. Not long after that, she does her regularly scheduled 6-month performance review, but instead of Joel being there, it is with Elliot and that chief employment lawyer. And they fire her very straightforwardly, like pretty much a few minutes into it. Her laptop becomes confiscated. She's not allowed to go back to her desk to retrieve her personal items. She even asks if she can at least say bye to her team, but they say no. Instead, she is walked out of the building by a security guard. And that is basically how things ended for her at Facebook. So by the end of the book, she has to reconcile with the fact that she tried to change Facebook from the inside out and she failed. And also come to terms with how the people in leadership don't care about anyone. They have so much money in abundance that they could have afforded to do the right thing so many times and they just didn't care to do it. So to update you on how things are for everyone right now, Joel Kaplan is still working at Facebook and has been promoted since then. Sheryl Sandberg is gone, but we're not sure why. There were reports before she left that she was facing internal scrutiny for multiple things, including her use of corporate resources for personal projects like her Lean In Foundation. Mark Zuckerberg is still doing his thing at Facebook and challenging Elon Musk to a cage match and other stupid shit. And he, like everyone else, loves AI. I've talked about AI on my channel before in the context of writing. Every time I do, I always get comments dismissing me because people don't think it's a big deal. And so I ask you, after hearing all of this shit, what the fuck do you think is gonna happen as social media companies and Google and every tech company keeps making you use AI? What do you think it means when OpenAI wins a $200 million contract with the US military? What do you think the next stage of this country and this world is gonna be? Because my answer is we're fucking cooked. Before I end this video, I do want to say that the one person we haven't scrutinized throughout this book is Sarah herself. And I have mixed feelings about her because on one hand, I think she wrote a really good book. I was gooped and gagged by it, and I'm really glad that she wrote it. I also have a lot of sympathy for her health issues and being sexually harassed. And I can also believe that there were things about Facebook that she genuinely didn't know about because most of us don't know what goes on at top leadership leadership of a company, especially when we're siloed off into different teams. But on the other hand, she was literally like the director of public policy. And I wonder if I would trust her more if she had dedicated a section to admitting her complicity and working through that instead of completely skirting around it and acting like she had no agency the entire time. For example, when we look at internet.org, there was so much opposition that digital rights group had against that kind of project because of how problematic it was. But Sarah described pushing Mark in front of world leaders at the UN in September 2015 to pitch internet.org as a solution to the digital divide. So she was advocating for internet.org to be added to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, but at the same time, she's expressing concerns about Mark's false claims of altruism behind this project. And so it's just kind of weird that there's this contradiction between her words admonishing Mark for doing this, but her actions pushing Mark to push this project even further. There's also another Facebook employee who was a former head of public policy in Bangladesh, who says in an article that I will link in my description that by 2012, 1 year after joining Facebook, Sarah had ample evidence of the platform's role in enabling violence and harm upon its users and state-sanctioned digital repression. But her memoir doesn't mention these events or the repeated warnings to her team from civil society groups in Asia before the situation escalated. Even when you recount her meeting the military junta in Myanmar, she doesn't mention the fact that in that same year, Burmese civil society had warned repeatedly about the rising hate speech on Facebook fueling violence against Muslims. So how is it that she doesn't know what was going on until it was like way too late into the game? Again, I'm really glad she wrote openly about a lot of things in this book, but I also can't help but wonder about the things she didn't write about and chose to leave out. Or maybe legally she can't outright admit that she was complicit or mention that she was aware of certain things. Or maybe there's like more complicated explanations for why teams are so siloed off that they don't know about these things. But the cynical part of me wonders if she had never gotten fired from Facebook, would she have even called this out at all? There were so many times where she's like, I need to get the fuck out of here. And it's like, were you ever going to though? You dealt with so much bullshit, and then when you finally left, it wasn't because you decided to. It was because this asshole was like, listen, you're speaking up too much, and then they booted you out. These are the things I wonder. And so I'm gonna conclude this very long video. I would love to hear what you think about whether Sarah is complicit or if you would give her more grace, knowing what we know from this book. And also, I want to know which story from this book has shocked you the most. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching this very long video. And thanks again to Lovehoney for sponsoring it too. Once again, you can use my code CindyPeach20 for 20% off of your own peach toy so that you can take a break from this very twisted world that we live in. I'm very excited to post my next video though, because I have very, very big news coming soon. So keep an eye out for that. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.